A number of years ago, I was invited to participate in a very nice program at the Hillel Hebrew Academy that was organized in honor of Pesach. It was called Shoalim Vidorshin Behilchos Pesach. The program allowed 6th through 8th graders to ask any question they had about Pesach to a group of local rabbis. Most of the questions were submitted to us prior to the program. I still remember one question a girl asked. She asked, "Why do Jews eat so much?" What this girl was asking is actually profound, because for most Jews, the main focus of Seder night is not the recitation of the Haggadah, but rather it's the festive meal. If this is so, then we must wonder, is there any redemptive element to just focusing on the eating? Or put differently, is there any philosophical or theological meaning to the meal, which is the centerpiece of the entire Seder experience for so many people? Many commentators have noted that it is a misconception to view the Seder as merely a fulfillment of the obligation of Oneg v'Simchas Yom Tov, of enjoying a wonderful Yom Tov meal. Rather, this meal is unique, it's different, for it's intrinsically related to the Seder experience. There are a number of proofs to this fact. First, Shulchan Aruch is included in the Simanei HaSeder, indicating that it's not just another Yom Tov meal. Tosfot in Avodah Zarah, Hey Amid Beis, develops this very point by observing that this meal is unique because it's a meal celebrating our redemption from slavery to freedom. The 18th century of Yaakov Emden, the Yavitz, even noted that this feature of the Seder, the meal itself, is held in such high esteem because it is the only one of the 15 simanim that is listed with two names, Shulchan Aruch. From Kadesh all the way through Nirtzah, if you think about it, only Shulchan Aruch has two words to describe it. The Yavitz says that's not by accident. He explains that this is so because there are two distinct parts that combine to make the Seder. One is the physical eating, while the second is the spiritual experience one is to have at the Seder meal. And finally, there are many commentators, among them the 19th century Netziv, who note the unique feature of this meal versus any other Shabbos or Yom Tov meal. It's because this meal, and only this meal, is bracketed in by Hallel. Before we begin to eat, we sing 2 chapters of Hallel. And when we finish the meal, we conclude the other chapters of Hallel. This fact makes the meal itself part of the Hallel experience. In light of this, it behooves us to analyze the role of food in Jewish thought. Eating has played a role in theology from the very beginning of time. The only positive commandment that Adam received in the Garden of Eden was to eat from all the fruits of the trees in the garden. He had one negative commandment, and that was the prohibition against eating from one tree, the Eitz Hadas. The 19th century commentator, the Haktav v'Hakabbalah, notes that the word for eating in Hebrew is achila, aleph, chaf, yud, lamed, hey. It would appear that the root word for achila should be aleph, chaf, lamed. But he notes that there's another possible root word for eating, and that is chaf, lamed, hey. What is the difference between these two possibilities? The root word chaf, lamed, hey means destruction, annihilation, while aleph, chaf, lamed suggests that eating is not about destruction, devouring the food, but rather it's about elevation and advancement. In the act of eating, are we only involved in the act of destruction, of annihilation, of consumption, of devouring the food that we eat? Or are we involved in an elevation, in an advancement? Rav Soloveitchik notes that the Jewish view of the meal of the Suda is totally unknown to the world. It combines two contradictory elements. On the one hand, it is the animalistic experience of gratifying our physical needs. It is the Chaf Lamed Hey experience. On the other, it is offering of a sacrifice, if you will. Our tables are compared to the altar, to the Mizbeach. We remarkably treat our tables as the holiest place in our homes. But how do we combine both of these elements? Our sages taught us, if three have eaten at one table and have not spoken words of Torah, it is as if they've eaten of sacrifices to the dead. Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Gimel. The meal in Judaism is not simply an animalistic achievement of devouring food. The meal is transformed into a symposium where Torah is debated. Furthermore, the meal in Judaism has another goal, and that is taught to us at the Seder. The ideal for the Jew is not to eat alone. He's to invite, quote unquote, the Torah, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow who are within your gates. The meal is transformed into a chesed opportunity. This is how we start the meal of all meals, the Seder, by transforming it into a meal of inviting those in need. On Seder night in particular, we have eating that achieves a constructive and non-destructive goal. This is the constructive eating, for it isn't done to consume, rather it is done to elevate. It is an eating that does not destroy, but rather brings us to perfection. It is a meal that transforms us from slaves to free men. The Talmud in Brachos Nun Hey Amud Aleph states that one should view the table, as we mentioned before, just like an altar in the Beis Hamikdash. I remember as a kid, my father never letting us sit on the table at home. He always said, "You can't sit on the table. That is a mizbeach." This approach also led to the minhag, the custom, first mentioned in the 13th century halachas, the rokeach, and subsequently actually codified in Shulchan Aruch, in Aruch Chaim Kuf Pei Seif Hey, that we remove the knives from the table before we begin reciting Birchat HaMazon. The reason for these customs is because eating for the Jew wasn't a negative experience found in the root word Chof Lamed Hey, destruction, consumption, annihilation, but rather in the root word Aleph Chof Lamed, which implies elevation. Put simply, the lesson of the Seder meal is to teach us that the Jew doesn't live to eat. Rather, he eats in order to live, in order to be an Eved Hashem serving the Almighty. May we all think of these essential thoughts as we enjoy our Sidurim. Chag Kosher V'Sameach.